And it looks like we're live. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in the middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. Yeah, we had a holiday yesterday, so I don't know what day it is. Anyway, I am so excited today to be joined by Ruth Ware and Sophie Hannah, two of my absolute favorite authors. I don't miss a book of theirs. How are you today?
Good, thanks. Really great. Great to be here.
Well, let me get the introductions out of the way, and then we will get to chatting. So Ruth Ware worked as a waitress, a bookseller, a teacher of English as a foreign language, and a press officer before settling down as a full-time writer. She now lives with her family in Sussex on the south coast of England. She is the #1 New York Times and Globe and Mail best-selling author of In a Dark, Dark Wood, The Woman in Cabin 10, The Lying Game, The Death of Mrs Westaway, and The Turn of the Key, and then out today, One by One. Hi, Ruth.
Hello. I feel obliged to say I do have a glass of wine, but it is 6:30 here and it is publication day, so that's my excuse.
I will toast you with my coffee. Sophie Hannah is the New York Times bestselling author of numerous psychological thrillers, which have been published in 51 countries and adapted for television, as well as The Monogram Murders, the first Hercule Poirot novel authorized by the estate of Agatha Christie, and its sequels, Closed Casket, The Mystery of Three Quarters, and The Killings at Kingfisher Hill, which comes out in the US next week. Sophie is also the author of a self-help book, How to Hold a Grudge, and hosts the podcast of the same name. She lives in Cambridge in the UK. Hi, Sophie.
Hi.
So great to be joined by both of you. For those of you watching at home, a couple things about ordering books, business things before we start chatting. So both authors have been gracious enough to send book plates for their books, signed book plates. So if you order either title from us, we'll include a signed book plate with the order. Ruth Ware did have 50 one-by-one knit hats. However, those of you who were on the ball and pre-ordered have gotten those. So we no longer have any of the hats. We do have plenty of signed book plates. And then to celebrate that this is an Agatha Christie release by Sophie Hannah, I actually have commemorative covers and envelopes of when the Royal Mail did an Agatha Christie line. So we're going to put those in with any purchases for Killing at Kingfisher Hill. I've been saving them, but I have a stack of them, and I'm like, you know what? It's great. It's something fun to do. So as I said, I'm very excited. Why don't you just, to get us going, tell us about your new books? And since it's Ruth's on sale date, let's start with her.
Oh, okay. So One by One is my new book. It's a locked room mystery, which I do enjoy a good locked room mystery. And it's set in this super luxurious chalet in the French Alps in this really exclusive resort. And this tech company, Snoop, has hired the chalet for a corporate retreat. And the reason they've come on this retreat is because they're like this really up-and-coming .com startup, and they've been offered this huge buyout offer, and half the company want to accept the offer and the other half want to remain private and then, you know, maybe kind of float on the stock exchange later. So they're completely split, and they've come to this chalet to try and thresh it out. The book's told from two points of view. One is Erin, who's the chalet host, and the other is Liz, who used to be a secretary for Snoop way back in the day when it was just like a tiny firm of 5 people. And because she was there right at the beginning, Liz has a tiny 2% shareholding. And because of the way the votes have fallen out, she ends up being the person who has the casting vote in this buyout. So things are all set for a really tense week. And then one of the founders of the company goes missing in the snow. She disappears. And then there's an avalanche. So things go from bad to worse, basically.
That's great. It is great. I mean, it was great. I loved it. I read all of your books. Okay, Sophie, tell us about Killings at Kingfisher Hill.
Okay, so Poirot and his sidekick, Catchpool, who is his sidekick in all of my books, he's a Scotland Yard inspector, they are on their way from London to the Kingfisher Hill country estate, which is a very posh and exclusive country estate in the home counties. And the reason they're going there is because a man who lives there, whose name is Richard Devonport, has summoned them because his fiancée is imminently about to be hanged for the murder of his brother. And he is convinced that his fiancée did not murder his brother and wants Poirot to come and basically save her life before it's too late and she's been hanged. So they're on their way to Kingfisher Hill to investigate this mystery when some strange things start to happen on the coach that they're traveling on. And two very, very strange and mysterious incidents occur during this coach journey, both of which are connected to murders. And so Poirot and Catchpool are like, this is too big a coincidence. How can we be on our way somewhere to investigate a murder, and suddenly everyone on this coach is behaving in a very puzzling way? Not everyone, but two people on the coach are behaving in very puzzling ways and both wanting to talk about murder. There's one woman who's afraid she will be murdered, and she's been warned apparently by a mysterious stranger that if she sits in a particular seat during this coach journey, she will be murdered. And yet she is sitting in that very seat. So that makes no sense. And then there's another woman who seems very determined to confess to Poirot that she committed a murder once. And she seems rather proud of this. And actually, she's trying to convince Poirot that when she committed her murder, it was absolutely the right thing to do. Anyway, so then Poirot and Catchpool get to Kingfisher Hill. And shortly afterwards, a body turns up. So this is a house that's already had the murder of Frank Devonport take place in it. There's another body found. Nobody knows who it is because it's been severely disfigured. But there's a note found by the body which links it very clearly to one of the women on the coach. And yet Poirot can't see how the two could be connected. So I like to make life difficult for myself by having a really super challenging mystery to solve.
Great. It's great. All of your Poirots are fantastic. And we were just chatting earlier about how wonderful they are on audiobook as well. They're just, you've got a great narrator. So today we're talking about your new books, but we're also billing this as a golden age discussion. Now, let's be clear, it's a golden age discussion, but there's really one golden age writer that we're going to be talking about mostly. So Agatha Christie, who would be 130 if she were alive today, is still a major influence in the mystery world. And Ruth, you have been called the Agatha Christie of our generation. And clearly, Sophie has been honored with taking up the mantle of writing Poirot by the Christie estate. So I'd like to kind of talk about Christie and your works. Sophie, can you tell us, like, where did your love of Christie come from? But then also maybe a little bit about the process of being approached to write Poirot.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. I was actually talking to someone about this earlier today. I think my love of Christie, obviously it came from me reading one of her books at the age of 12 and loving it and thinking, I've got to read everything this writer has written. But I think I was ideally set up for that by having been an avid fan of Enid Blyton as a young child. And a friend and I were talking about how actually, if you've got addicted to Enid Blyton's mysteries at the age of approximately 7, then by the age of 12, you will have read all of Enid Blyton and you'll be ready for Agatha Christie. And it's almost as though Enid and Agatha got together and Enid kind of went, right, I'll have them first. I'll prime them. I'll get them so they're so hooked on mysteries that they'll read all of me and then they'll need to go on to you. Otherwise, they won't be able to get their mystery fix, because that was certainly my experience. And I've met so many Agatha fans who were Enid Blyton fans first. And I just think it's so interesting. It's like, if you love mysteries as a kid, then you carry on loving them as a grown-up. And, you know, when I'd read all the Secret Seven, all the Famous Five, all the Five Find Outers, it was like, I can't read these again, and I'm too old for them now. And just by chance, my dad bought me an Agatha Christie novel at that moment. It was The Body in the Library. I was 12 and I just like inhaled it and thought that was the best thing ever. Like, that's Enid Blyton, but even better. And so I was hooked from that moment onwards. How it came about that I was writing Poirot novels was a huge coincidence. My agent, my literary agent, was in a meeting at HarperCollins, and he remembered that HarperCollins were Agatha's publishers. And he remembered that I was a big fan of Agatha Christie. And even though the meeting was not about either me or Agatha Christie, he just kind of had this notion. So he just blurted it out, said, hey, why don't you guys commission my author, who's a huge Agatha Christie fan, to write a new Poirot novel? And was told very firmly, no, no, no. The family are very adamant they don't want any new books. And then, by complete coincidence, the very next day, that editor at HarperCollins had a meeting with the Christie family, and the Christie family said, this is going to surprise you after everything we've been saying for 36 years or whatever, but we have now decided we do in fact want a new book. So it was really just that complete chance of my agent having that idea, opening his mouth, saying that, and it being just the day before that meeting with the Christies. It was just very weird the way it happened.
That is amazing. It's like that famous combo of talent and luck working out, because clearly, I mean, you've done a great job with them, but it sounds like it was rather fortuitous. I should mention, I'm a little sad that my Murder by the Book Great Detectives t-shirt cuts off at Holmes and Watson, because I also have Marple and Poirot. I'm wearing it in honor of our discussion today, but they're not being shown, sadly. I think what you were saying about Enid Blyton is interesting. We probably have a comparison here in the U.S. to Nancy Drew. Yes. I think, Enid Blyton doesn't have the following here in the U.S., but so many children, myself included, read Nancy Drew and then went to Agatha Christie. For me, it was, and then there were none, and then I was hooked. Yeah. But a little gateway drugs here and there, and then we're mystery readers for life. How about you, Ruth? What was your inspiration to kind of write in this classic style? Where did your love of Christie come from?
Well, so when Sophie was saying about her first Christie, I was trying to kind of cast my mind back and think what my first Christie would have been, and I honestly can't remember. Which is weird, because I can remember what my first introduction to Holmes was, as we're on the subject of the sweater, which was my mum reading me The Speckled Band as a bedtime story, which turned out to be an absolutely horrendous idea, because I think I had nightmares for about a week. I was only about 8 or 9, maybe even less, and this idea of like death coming down a bell pull in the middle of the night while you're asleep was just so horrific to me. I think it sort of seared itself onto my brain. But like Sophie, I was, I don't know if I would say I was an Enid Blyton fan, because I was always quite a critical reader of Enid Blyton. I didn't like her, sort of the way the girls were always relegated to making beds. And I loved Nancy Drew, and I think I preferred her in that sense. But I did go on to Agatha at about sort of 12, 13. And I think the thing is that the books that you read at that time are just formative in a way that nothing else is. Books that you read as an adult very rarely kind of filter into you to such a great extent as the ones that you read as a kind of a young teen. And I think what Christie imprinted on me was like the feel and the shape of a good mystery. Yeah. The way you should set up the kind of the conundrum, play with the reader, play fair with them, give them all of the information, give them all of the clues that they need to solve it. And then at the end of it, that kind of the payoff moment, which I sort of think of as the click, the moment when all the pieces of the puzzle come together and it looks so obvious. When you read a really good Christie, you can't believe that you didn't see it, because when the patterns all put together, it just feels like, well, of course, that was the only way it could possibly be. But until that moment, until she puts it together, you just you can't see how the pieces sort of fit, and it's so satisfying when you see it all kind of slot into place. And that's the pleasure that I strive to give in my books. I want people to be mystified, hopefully, but when the reveal is made, I want them to be thinking, oh, of course, how did I not spot that? And I want them to go back and reread a passage and go, yeah, it was all there, like that famous moment in Roger Ackroyd where she kind of lays it all out, without any spoilers for people who haven't.
You scared me right there.
I hope that when people go back and read my books again, they do think, yeah, it was all there, it was all laid out for me. And yeah, that's my gold standard, I think, for a crime novel.
The other thing Agatha does brilliantly, you know, I completely agree that, you know, when you find out, it's like that sort of weird, like almost like a kaleidoscope rearranging, and you go, oh yeah, all of that. But I think also what she does so brilliantly is she makes you really want to know.
Yeah.
And so many crime, I mean, like obviously mystery-based crime writers know that their mission is to have people wanting to know and then deliver the solution at the end. So that's kind of taken as read. But I find it astonishing how many crime writers just sort of put the mystery there at the beginning, present it, but don't seem to put any effort into atmospherically building up that desire in the reader to know. So I read a lot of mysteries where you encounter the mystery, and then some people wander about saying, we really must solve that mystery. But what they don't do in the way that Agatha does is just write the book in such a way that almost on every page, your desire to know is getting stronger. And for me, that's right up there with Agatha's greatest things. It's not just that she has the irresistible opening, the brilliant solution, the clues, the unguessability. She has all of that. But it's also, she just, like no one else, Agatha makes you more and more desperate to know. And she uses so many, like the way Miss Marple will, you know, something will happen and Miss Marple will go, I see. Well, yes, that's very interesting. And someone says, why is it interesting? And she says, never mind. And you're like, oh, all these kind of devices. And that's so important because it means that by the time you get to the point where you're going to find out, it's just like you've been wound up so much to a pitch of wanting to know.
That's what I suffer from, of course, because I don't have a detective. So I don't have the person who can go, but Hastings, of course you realise what this means. And, you know, you have to just rely on, I don't know, conveying that in other ways to the reader.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you haven't got, in my latest non-Poirot novel, my latest contemporary thriller, I precisely thought, like, okay, so there's no pair of detectives to be mystified together and wind the reader up. So you need to bring in other strategies so that the reader's like, come on, how long am I going to have to wait?
Yeah, and also Christie continues to drop those puzzles too, like things that don't make sense. So it deepens the mystery without giving you any relief that something's been explained. So I think it's interesting you mentioned kind of from a writing perspective, how you keep that tension going. Both of you have done interesting things with your narrators. So Ruth, in this, like I found that this type of book is certainly a trend right now. Like people are really, really loving classic golden age constraints with a contemporary feel. So I actually just call it contemporary golden age. Like, oh, yeah. So you like contemporary golden age because you know, you don't read the books. There's nothing dated clearly about anything that either one of you are writing. However, so a modern reader who might find even something written in the 40s as, you know, daunting can just get into these books. But Ruth, you structure it. You have this Agatha Christie and Then There Were None inspired plot, but with two narrators alternating, which is not something really Christie would have done. And then Sophie, you also have set it up so that you have a new narrator, Edward, throughout your books that can kind of tell the story without, I think brilliantly, without being compared necessarily to how Christie told the Poirot story. So you want to talk a little bit about your narrator choices? Ruth, why don't you start?
So the narrator issue was like the hardest thing about this book. It's the first book that I've written with two narrators. And I've always kind of dodged it a bit because I hate books that have more than one narrator when you can't tell who's narrating. I find it really frustrating when you have to keep sort of flicking back to the beginning of the chapter to figure out who's telling it. So I've always sort of slightly chickened out of doing that myself because I was worried about falling into that trap. But I ended up using two narrators for two reasons. And the first was just really mundane. I wrote the first probably 30,000 words of the book just with Erin, who's the chalet girl. and something wasn't working. And I sent the beginning of the book to my agent and said, I don't know, I just feel like something's not quite right here. What do you think? And of course, what I hoped was that she would go, oh, darling, it's brilliant, you know, crack on, it'll be fantastic. And because she's a really good agent, she didn't do that. She said, no, I think you're right. I think there is something missing. And it took me a really long time to figure out what it was. And the problem was, because Erin is an outsider, which is why I picked her, because I wanted that outsider perspective of the company, because they're just, in many ways, they're just awful. And so you need someone who's got that kind of distance to go, but because she was an outsider and she doesn't know these people and she doesn't know the kind of currents that are sort of running through, she just didn't know enough about the situation to kind of pass it. And so I ended up having to put her in all these situations where she was sort of overhearing conversations, or, you know, walking in the middle of things, and it wasn't natural, and it didn't feel right for her to be kind of, you know, snooping at doors and stuff. And I realized that the solution was to have a second narrator who was an insider at the company. And that's why I decided to choose Liz, because she's been at the company right from the beginning. She knows everything, but she's also an outsider in a different way, because she's left Snoop. She doesn't feel like she ever really fitted in there, because she's like just, you know, a completely regular person, and they are like these kind of highfalutin, you know, privately educated, very moneyed, very sophisticated people that she never felt completely comfortable with. But the other reason why I ended up thinking it worked really well was because the whole book is really about colleagues and about the working relationship we have with people. And I wanted to show both sides of that. I wanted to show that colleagues can be absolutely brilliant. They can be friends, they can be funny, they can get you through the day. And that's very much Erin's relationship with her colleague, Danny, who is the chef at the chalet. But, you know, some work relationships can be really toxic. And unfortunately, that's what's happened at Snoop, that they've sort of allowed all of these kind of slightly unhealthy practices to build up. So you get kind of both perspectives on the company, but also both perspectives on the working relationship. But yeah, it was really hard. And I spent a lot of time trying to make sure they were distinct from each other. But what I really enjoyed was seeing the same events from different perspectives, and that doesn't happen so much at the beginning of the novel, but as it goes on, you very often see the same scene playing out, first from Erin's point of view and then from Liz, or vice versa, and at different times they have different information about what's going on, and seeing it from kind of, it was really fun. And it was a really fun game to play with the reader, to say, you know, you think this is what's happening, but actually when you see it from the other perspective, maybe this is what's happening. And that was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost, it's not really playing with the unreliable narrator, but having two different perspectives. You don't, you know, it's not one person telling exactly what happened the whole time. So it works well. So Sophie, you came up with your Inspector Edward.
Yes, well, I decided that all of Agatha's Poirot novels are either narrated by Hastings or they're in the third person. And I didn't want to try and do Hastings and get the voice wrong. And I figured that my prose style would inevitably be different from Agatha's. So I thought, you know, I just can't sound like Hastings. I didn't fancy third person because I actually have a preference for first person narration. I'm going to be honest. Lots of people have a preference for third person. I am always more drawn to a book if it's in the first person. Even if there's multiple narrators, that's fine, but I like the I rather than the he, she, they, whatever. So I also wanted to have that brilliant thing that you get in the Hastings Poirot novels, but also in, for example, Wuthering Heights, where you have a narrator talking to the reader who is, as it were, a normal person that the reader can identify with, but talking about a much more kind of puzzling, enigmatic or important character. And I thought, you know, obviously it would be awful to have a Poirot novel narrated by Poirot. That's too close. He's too grand for the reader to be in his head.
He spent his whole time going on about how brilliant he was anyway.
I know, but can you imagine? It just would be wrong.
Yeah.
be bad and wrong. So I thought, right, I want a narrator. Poirot needs a sidekick. And so I thought, well, who can I create as a sidekick who will actually be a really different kind of sidekick from Hastings? So Hastings is lovely and good and loyal, but he never really makes any progress towards becoming a better detective. And I thought, well, I would love to be Poirot's sidekick, and I would really try and improve my own detecting skills, because, you know, working with the master, case after case, you'd want to try and get a bit better to reach his level as much as you could. So I decided that Catchpool and Poirot would kind of have a mentor-mentee relationship, where Poirot would see potential in Catchpool, but also recognize that he's nowhere near as good as Poirot is. And so he'd kind of try and train him and teach him. And at first Catchpool got cross when this happened, because he liked to think he was a good detective, and then suddenly finds out he's not. But in the later, certainly in Kingfisher Hill, Catchpool is very happy to be learning from Poirot. So this book is the most relaxed Catchpool has ever been. He's got progressively more relaxed and happy about working with Poirot. As each book has
I
gone.
have to ask, did you ever think about doing it from the perspective of Ariadne Oliver? Because that's who if I had been like the person trying to decide who to narrate it from, that's who I would have gone for.
I didn't, mainly because in the very early stages of discussions, we worked out that we wanted any Poirot novels I wrote to be set between 1928 and 1932.
Ah, okay.
Because that was a 4-year gap where Agatha didn't write any Poirot novels. So that seemed like a good...
Kind of slot in. Yeah, and Ariadne's later.
And yeah, so I think, I could be wrong, and there could be, she could make an appearance in an early short story. I think she does. But in the novels, her first appearance, I think, is Cards on the Table. So I didn't want to sort of like change the
timeline. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And also I kind of wanted, you know, since Poirot is such a big element and the key element of any Poirot novel, I kind of thought, right, that's my given, that's my, you know, ingredient that I've been given. But everything else I should create myself. So I try not to use any other characters, although I did use George the valet in The Mystery of Three Quarters. George makes an appearance there.
So I'm going to pause this discussion really quickly for a couple business things. If you've tuned in a little bit late, if you wait until this video is over, you can watch it from the beginning under our Facebook videos tab. I'll also be uploading it to YouTube later this evening, and I'll make sure to post on social media when that link is up and shareable for people who don't have Facebook. If you have been watching the comments, which I am not just messing around on my phone, I'm glancing down for comments and questions in them. Some people have already put some questions in the comments. In about 15 minutes, I will get to those questions. So if you have a question for either author or both about Christie or their new books or whatever you have a question about, pop it in the comments. I think that John at the bookstore has been behind the scenes, and we've been having a problem with people trying to spam our comments recently and get you to sign up to watch the video, which is already happening above your comments. So it doesn't make any sense. Do not click those links. I think that they have been deleting them and blocking, but again, don't click those links. Don't give anyone credit card information unless it is our website to buy these books, which again, we have signed book plates of. So make sure to put questions in the comments, and we are going to get back on track with our conversation. So Ruth, one of the things about each one of your books, I've seen you write and talk about how they're inspired by certain Christies, whether they're plot devices or whatever. Did you feel like starting with this Christie homage gave you then liberty to take that wherever you wanted? Was it a good jumping off point? And how do you kind of decide? Like, has it just been lightning bolt inspiration strikes each time, or you want to talk about that process?
So my first few books, so In a Dark, Dark Wood, I don't think I was kind of consciously thinking about Christie at all when I wrote it. And it was only when the book came out and the reviews started to appear, and actually I think it was my agent who was the first person who said, gosh, it's very like a modern day Christie, you know, it's very plotty and it's very, and then the reviews came out and people kept making this comparison, which I love. I'm really flattered by it. And so then when I was writing my follow-up, which was The Woman in Cabin 10, I guess that was kind of at the forefront of my mind, and that is probably my most sort of, that was my Christie homage in a way, just because people were putting my name in brackets with hers, which was so incredible to me. It was something I never expected, and it just got me thinking about what I love about her books. And you know, I think my favorite settings in Christie are those really kind of super luxe settings where, you know, you're on the Orient Express, or you're on a dahabeah on the Nile, or, you know, a luxury island, or, you know, just somewhere that you would just love to go for a holiday. And what Christie does so brilliantly is turn it into a complete nightmare, and it becomes this kind of sense of stifled luxury and this sort of claustrophobic nightmare. And that was what I tried to do with Cabin 10, where, you know, it's this enviable once in a lifetime cruise that turns into, you know, a complete house of horror for my main character. And then I sort of went slightly away from Christie for a few books. So The Lying Game is not Christie-ish at all. It's probably my sort of least Christie-ish book. The Death of Mrs Westaway is probably my thank you to Daphne Du Maurier, because, you know, I love my cousin Rachel and Rebecca, and she taught me so much about how to write character, that was my kind of, you know, my nod to her and my thank you to her. And then The Turn of the Key is obviously my Henry James book. It's sort of, you know, it's not a rewrite of The Turn of the Screw, but it owes a lot to that novel. And so One by One is kind of, in a way, it's coming full circle back to my Christie-ish roots. And there's definitely a nod to, And Then There Were None. There's probably a nod to the Sitterford mystery for people who've read that. And just that, it just that kind of that pure pleasure of a locked room mystery where you've got very limited cast of suspects and they're being picked off one by one, hence the title, which simultaneously gets you closer to the truth but also further away from it. So I guess I didn't sit down and think, gosh, you know, which Christie novel shall I tackle today? The motive for writing the book was really because I'd done novels about, you know, family and friendship and romantic love and the crimes that arise out of all of those situations, but I had never done a novel about colleagues. And so the inspiration behind the book was really to write something about the ways that colleagues can make our lives both wonderful and at times horrific. But the Christie-ish elements kept creeping in because, you know, that's what I love about, you know, the idea of being kind of trapped in a snowbound hotel and, you know, at the top of a funicular. Who wouldn't want to be there?
Yeah, I mean, I will read that book every day. You put a whole closed cast of characters on an island or in a snowbound hotel or, you know, Alps or whatever it is, lock them away, cut off the telephone lines, I'm in. Like, give me that book all day, every day. So I'm in no way complaining that they're Agatha Christie inspired. It's wonderful to me because, again, they are fresh and new, but with those concepts. And so I think a lot of people who read classic mysteries growing up can really, really enjoy those books. Now, Sophie, you kind of have a different problem because I know that you had to read you read all the Poirots before writing yours, and you probably have to avoid things Christie has done in the past plot-wise. Do you find it difficult, or how do you come up with your plots? How does that work?
So it's kind of weird because I don't find it difficult. Like I don't think even once had to go through a process of thinking, oh, I'll do that. No, wait, Agatha's done that. I know, I'll do that instead. Oh, damn, she's done that as well. Like, that has never happened. I think my knowledge of what Christie has and hasn't done in her stories is so innate. Like, I know what she has and hasn't done, just like I know how to brush my teeth. So I don't really have to think, okay, what has she done? What hasn't she done? It's just in me. So when I think my brain, when it produces ideas or suggested ideas for a new Poirot novel, it sort of automatically vetted those ideas to check Christie hasn't done them already, and it only bothers me with the ones that it knows she hasn't done. So that's quite easy. But what I'm trying to always do is recognize a Christie-ish idea that Christie hasn't done. And so, I mean, the two best examples of that, so The Mystery of Three Quarters starts with four completely separate people approaching Poirot out of the blue and saying, "How dare you accuse me of murder?" And Poirot's like, I haven't, like literally, I don't know who any of you are. And it turns out these four people have all received letters signed by Hercule Poirot, allegedly, or signed in his name, accusing them all of exactly the same murder. Poirot has no idea what's going on. He only knows he did not write those letters. He's never heard of the alleged murder victim who is named in the letters. And so he has to go and investigate to find out, is this guy dead? Is he real? Is he dead? If he's dead, was he murdered? And why is someone bringing Poirot's name into it? Now, when I had that idea, I both loved it as an idea and also thought Agatha might have had that idea. Agatha might have written a book starting in that way. And the other example, in fact, the biggest example for me, which I unfortunately can't elaborate on because it was an idea for an ending, the motive for murder in my second Poirot novel, Closed Casket, that motive was the first thing I thought of about the whole book. So I was actually having a discussion with my sister, a kind of argument discussion, and I was trying to win this argument. And I opened my mouth to make a particular point in the argument, and the point I was making gave me an idea for just what I thought was the most incredible motive for murder. And I was just like, I stopped and went, oh! My sister was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine. And so I had this idea and I thought that is honestly the best motive for murder that there could possibly be. It was elegant. I could sum it up in 4 words. I knew no one would guess it. It just had all the sort of hallmarks of a sort of perfect Christie-ish idea. And I just knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if Christie had thought of that idea, she would have loved it and she would have used it. Now, many people have said to me, you can't possibly know that. When you say that would definitely have happened, you can't prove that. And I'm like, I know I can't prove it, but I am certain she would have loved that idea and she would have done it herself. And so then I thought, thank goodness she didn't think of that one because it was still left for me to think of.
That's fantastic. So one of the topics that I love to discuss, and those of you who've been watching these interviews or any of our at-home recommendations since the COVID pandemic started, have already heard me say this. It is remarkable how many Agatha Christie books we have sold in the last 6 months. So I think
give us some stats, McKenna.
I don't have stats, but I can tell you that probably in April or May, I reordered. She wrote 80 something books, right? So, and I reordered the heavy hitters: Murder at the Vicarage, Mysterious Affair at Styles, Roger Ackroyd, all the ones that people, and then there were none in 10s and 15s to have in stock, which, you know, for a title like that, you don't necessarily need 15 copies in stock normally. And every other single Agatha Christie we ordered in quantities of 2s and 3s. We had an entire bookcase plus overstock. They are almost all gone.
Wow.
People are buying Agatha Christie books like crazy. And I have a theory, and I was wondering if maybe you wanted to discuss it. So one of the things about Golden Age mysteries and Agatha Christie books is that you start mostly with good people, bad things happen, and then in the end, there is justice. Sometimes Poirot is a little too heavy-handed with his justice, but there is justice. There's a ribbon tied around it, and all is well with the world. And I think that in reading that, people find comfort because there's so much unknown out there right now. What do you think is the lasting appeal of Agatha Christie books? Let's start with you, Sophie.
I mean, I think you've just hit the nail on the head. It's that it's so, I mean, yes, at the moment there is a lot of unknown because of the pandemic, but actually I've always thought that there's a lot of unknown. Most of what I want to know, I can't know it, at least not as soon as I want to know it, which is straight away. So like that's always the case, and it's especially the case now. And I think you're exactly right. Agatha Christie novels have this very recognizable structure of you're going to be uncertain, you're going to be more uncertain, you're going to be more uncertain, and then you're going to be totally certain at the end, and it's all going to be neatly solved and wrapped up. I think that's one of several qualities that makes Agatha's work really kind of satisfying and comforting. And I was working on the killings at Kingfisher Hill when the pandemic started. I'd already finished the first draft, but I was working on the edits. And then we all went into lockdown and everyone was worried. And so many writers, I don't know whether you noticed this, Ruth, but so many writers suddenly took to social media saying, I feel so trivial compared to key workers, all these people driving ambulances, working on vaccines, and here am I writing stories and I feel as if I don't matter. And I was like, I don't feel like that. I feel like a key worker creating valuable and much needed Poirot for hard times. Like, you know, because I immediately thought, what do I fancy doing when lockdown starts? I fancy reading a load of Agatha Christie's. And so, you know, it really kind of gave me new purpose. I was like, I'm writing this book. It's going to come out in August, September. And people really want to need books that they can lose themselves in and be comforted by. It is an essential thing in the world. And so, you know, that was really interesting to me because the first thing I wanted to do when I heard about COVID was start rereading Agatha Christie.
I had exactly the same experience. Yeah. In fact, I wrote a blog for Waterstones, our big chain bookshop in the UK, about exactly this and my love of classic crime. And it came out right at the beginning of our lockdown, which was sort of end of March, beginning of April. And it basically said that it said, you know, I the point at which I knew like the situation was getting to me and I was starting to become kind of anxious and my mental health was suffering was the point at which I found myself going to my bookshelf and putting down Sleeping Murder, because, you know, it's that complete comfort of knowing that you're in totally safe hands and that no matter how awful the problem is, it's going to be resolved and everybody's going to be quite stiff upper lip about it and they're going to get through it. And okay, it's not going to be completely okay at the end because the dead will still be dead, but there will be some kind of restorative justice done. I think there's only one Christie where the murderer gets away with it, and she was so upset by this that she went back and rewrote it to make sure that there was some kind of justice.
Which one, can you say which one that is without spoiling?
I don't want to say that it was a play initially, and
oh yeah. It
was recently filmed.
I know you
changed it.
And there's a famous Christie novel in which you could argue the murder goes unpunished.
Ooh, okay, we need to discuss this afterwards because I want to know what because it isn't necessarily that, you know, Poirot sort of gets everyone into a room and they get, but you know, there's usually some sense of like he didn't get away with it kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I do think it's that you feel you're in safe hands because there's that contract with the reader that everything's going to be all right. And I think the other thing is that Christie is often slightly criticized for her characters or sort of derided as not being a character writer, and I can see why, because the plot is the thing in her books and sometimes that does result in a few of the characters sort of serving more of a plot function. But you know what we have to remember is that she created Poirot and Marple, who are two of the most recognizable characters in the world probably, and you know, Miss Marple is a victory for kick-ass old ladies everywhere as far as I'm concerned. So
absolutely. And actually I think anyone who says Agatha didn't do character well is just wrong. Like I think they're wrong. I think if you look even at the characters who aren't series characters, there's so many good characters. You know, just a few that spring to mind. The murderer, I won't say who it is, but the murderer in Lord Edgware Dies.
Oh Oh, I nearly gave a spoiler then.
Yeah, and like I could name so many. The murderer in After the Funeral is a fantastic character. The vicar's wife in The Murder at the Vicarage. I mean, there's just so many. I think people say Agatha's not good at character because they've heard other people say it. And they don't bother to read the books and see the evidence, which clearly proves that Agatha was brilliant at writing character.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess at some point people have to find some way to criticize her, but I think the perennial joy we get out of reading her books, and the fact that it's no small feat that they don't really read as dated either. Like some of the other Golden Age writers you can pick up, and I mean, clearly there are some signs of the time statements and some politically incorrect things in Agatha's books that were at the time, you know, perhaps the views. They do have issues when you read them now, looking back. But as far as the tone and the language, some of the Golden Age writers, you know, they do feel dated, and hers just don't. It's really remarkable. Okay, so moving away from Christie, I should be opening up to questions pretty soon too, but moving away from Christie specifically, do either of you have any favorite Golden Age writers other than Christie?
I love Dorothy L. Sayers, Josephine Tay, who's quite uneven. Her best known book is probably The Franchise Affair, and that's not my favorite, but I love Brat Farah. It's one of my real comfort reads. Yeah, she's got a weird, talking of authors who are dated, she's got a really weird thing with physiognomy, which is where you can tell someone's a criminal from their face, which all sounds a bit like, you know, straying towards eugenics and kind of 1930s. But apart from that, she's really sound and her characterization is great. And I love Daphne Du Maurier, who I will defend to the death as a stone cold psychological thriller writer. I know she's not shelved that way, but Rebecca is a psychological thriller, and I will fight anyone who says it's not.
Yeah, and Daphne Du Maurier is the only other one that I would put in my favourite. So Agatha is my favourite Golden Age writer. Daphne Du Maurier is like, I mean, I think she's amazing, but I don't quite love her as much as I love Agatha, but those are my two. And then my other favourite writers, if I had to pick, I mean, I like loads of writers, but the person I got hooked on after Agatha, so I did Enid Blyton, and then I did all of Agatha. When I ran out of Agatha, my next real worshipful addiction was Ruth Rendell, and also the Barbara Vine books. And between the ages of about 18 and 25, I just compulsively read and collected the whole of Ruth Rendell.
You were just turning yourself into a crime writer, basically, weren't you, Sophie? You were just reading yourself into the role.
The training, yeah.
But it's fantastic because, you know, you clearly are writing Poirot and writing Golden Age in homage to Christie, but also you write psychological thrillers, which is what those Barbara Vine books are, dark psychological suspense. So you can clearly tell kind of the origins of Sophie Hannah, the writer, with that taste. It's Ruth, I was going to ask you about your Gothic influences in the last couple of books, but I mean, they're so Du Maurier inspired that it makes sense that she would have made your short list there. We're blowing through my questions at other times. Here we go. So here's one question about motive that I like to ask almost everyone. So P.D. James once said that there were only 4 motives for murder: love, lust, loathing, or lucre. Do you have a favorite motive?
So I don't agree with that statement.
That's a perfectly great answer.
Love, lust, loathing, or lucre. I mean, I think those 4 would cover a lot of motives in some way or another. But I mean, just to use a random example, in the Poirot novel 3-Act Tragedy, there are 3 murders. The first murder in the series and the third do not have any of those motives at all, and have really unusual motives. And my motive that I was so pleased with in Closed Casket, nothing to do with love, lust, money, hatred at all. So I don't agree. I love P.D. James, but on that I do not agree with her.
Yeah, I think it's a bit limiting. I mean, you could, like, you know, if someone's being blackmailed and they're doing it for self-preservation, is that like, what would you put that under? I mean, they might hate the blackmailer, but their motivation isn't hate, their motivation is self-protection. So I don't know if I would really agree with that.
If you wanted to have a list, you'd have to have fear on the list.
Yeah. So that's the one. I'm going to have to retire this question because that's the one that everyone brings up, and it's pretty all-encompassing, whether it's fear of your secrets being exposed or fear of losing a loved one to someone else. So, you know, fear actually can be a great motivator. So perhaps I'll retire this question, but it always sparks a good discussion.
Do you think she just discounted it because it didn't start with L? So it didn't.
I do.
Alphabetic prejudice going on there, definitely.
If I had to pick one off that list, though, I would definitely pick love, because I think that's the most interesting. And if you could only write motivations from one category for the rest of your career, I reckon that would keep you going. Whereas I think if you only had to write financial motives for the rest of your life, you'll get bored pretty quickly. Yeah,
for sure. All right, my last question for you before I look at these audience questions. I'm not being rude. I'm just trying to find questions from the comments. Are you writing right now? What are you working on? And what does your daily process look like? And how about we start with you, Ruth?
Oh dear. Well, normally I'd be able to say, yes, I'm finishing a book. I'm about to deliver it, because I'm a pretty, I've been a pretty regular book a year writer for 6 books now. But this year is the year I have taken a break, and I actually decided I was going to take a break before all of this kicked off, because I was just getting later and later with every book, because I was doing PR stuff and traveling, and I was just finding it harder and harder to hit the deadline. And so I thought, right, I'll build in a fire break, and then, I can kind of catch up with everything. And then, of course, COVID happened, and then lockdown happened. And like many people watching this, probably, I have small kids. We had the joy of homeschooling, and it basically just completely threw me off for about 6 months. So I am beginning to write again, but it's a much too early a stage to really talk about it. But my daily process when I'm home alone and not, trying to do year 6 maths, is basically I try to treat it like a day job. I drop the kids off at school, I come home, I sit in front of my computer, I do some words, I do some social media, I do my VAT returns, and then I go and pick the kids up. So it's not very glamorous, but it works for me.
Do you have like either sort of a daily word count you aim for, or a certain number of hours that you aim to do, or is it just whatever you can fit into the day?
No, I don't. I do look at my word count, but I don't have a target, because I think it makes you focus on the wrong things. Because I think some days it's a better day's work deleting 500 crap words than writing 1,000 crap words. The point is your story should be getting better every day, and if it's not, then that's a problem. And how, the number of words is a red herring. I just go by how intensely panicked I am at any point and sort of speed up and up and up. But I try to spend most of the day at my desk in one way or another, whether that's doing writing or doing something more practical, like my tax return or something.
Mm-hmm.
How about you,
Sophie?
I am just beginning to think about starting my next book. My next book is going to be a Simon and Charlie book. So that's my series. That the first 10 books I published were in that series. And I've had a long break from it because I've written 4 Poirots, I've written 4 standalones, a self-help book, I've launched a self-help podcast. So I've had really a long break. And I'm getting more and more emails every day from people going, where are Simon and Charlie? Why are you neglecting them? So the next book is going to be Simon and Charlie, and I'm just at the stage of like assembling ideas for it now. What I've spent lockdown doing is producing masses of content in my coaching program. Last year, I launched a coaching program for writers and for anyone who wants to write, called Dream Author. And I launched it, and it took off way beyond what I had thought would happen. So I've got like people joining in large numbers every day. And so I am creating, or I have been creating, masses of content so that, I mean, the easiest way to describe it is if someone were to join, say, tomorrow, they've got like so much that they can already access on the website. And then there's weekly group coaching, there's one-on-one coaching. It's an amazing like resource for anyone who wants to write. And I'm really excited about it. That's my kind of pet project. So I've been doing loads of work on that because, you know, the saying, like, if you build it, they will come. I built it. They came in huger numbers than I had foreseen. And so I'm doing my best to like give them as much help and coaching as I possibly can. So that's really been my lockdown sort of main activity. But now I'm just sort of thinking, okay, I need to start doing my plan for the next Simon and Charlie book. And I'm going to be starting to write it on the 1st of October. And it will be finished by the end of January, as I recently and confidently told my editor. This is what I do. I play, you know, that game Chicken, where you stay in the road for as long as you can bear to until a car comes. I do chicken all the time in relation to my work. If I think I need to do this by a certain date, but I don't know if I can, what I do is tell the person I'm going to be delivering it to that I totally will do it, and then I just have to. And often that's how I start with my plots as well. If I have a brilliant idea for a mystery, but no idea what the solution is, I write a blurb containing the mystery, end it with ... send it to my editor. She'll go, that sounds amazing. I can't wait to find out what that's going to turn out to be. And I'll be like, well, I've no idea at this point, but
Find out.
I need to find out because I've now told you this is the next book.
That's really funny. That gets around to a question I always like to ask, even though authors typically don't love it. So with your intricate plots, do you outline or do you just sit down and write?
I outline so massively. I'm like an outline addict. So every book, before I start writing the actual book, I construct such a detailed plan that if I were to fall under a bus and that plan were given to someone else, they could write that book. Wow. That level of detail. But a lot of people think, oh, well, that's not spontaneous and you can't be creative. I have the opposite experience. I find that firstly, the process of constructing my plan, I think of it as exciting and creative story architecture. And if you think of it like that, it's less boring than thinking of it as planning. And once I've got my really solid plan, then when I actually come to write the book, what I find is I have more creative and spontaneous new ideas because I'm not worried about the plot. It's like the plot's all sorted by the plan. So now I'm totally free to have any ideas I want to while I'm writing it. And when they come up, I just get to choose. Do I prefer this to what's in the plan? If I do, then I stick it in. If I don't, then I stick to the plan. So I've actually found that being a planner really enhances the whole creative process for me. And so many people assume it does the opposite. And that I find that really frustrating. I'm just like, try my planning method and you will see that it actually makes for more creativity, not less.
That's fascinating. I have heard plenty of authors argue the alternate. So yeah, for sure. How about you, Ruth?
I don't really outline, contrary to Sophie. I always know who did it, and I almost always know why. Mainly because of that thing I was speaking about earlier in terms of, you know, playing fair with the reader. You want the reader to feel like they had all the information, and as a writer you can only drop those clues in if you know what the solution is. So I don't think I could write a mystery. I know some people say they do. I don't think I could plot it without knowing the end point that I was aiming for. But I don't tend to know what happens in between. Or I have like ideas that I might include, but I don't write them down. But I'm not a big note taker full stop. Like I don't write notes about my characters. I don't, in my day-to-day life, I don't have a to-do list. I just kind of hold everything back here. And yeah, it's kind of similar to the process that Sophie was talking about of, you have ideas, and if a better one comes up, you kind of slot it in. And people say, aren't you worried about forgetting stuff? And I always think, well, if an idea is any good, it'll stick because it's memorable. And if I forgot it, it's probably because it wasn't that fantastic an idea in the first place. So I don't really worry about that. But I think I would get bored if I outlined too closely. If I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I completely take Sophie's point that you don't have to stick to it, and there's a kind of joy in, figuring out how it's going to actually turn out. But for me, part of the reason why I write is to find out what happens next, like to find out what characters are going to do. And on the occasions when I have tried to outline, I've found that the action sometimes feels a little bit wooden. And I think it's because I'm doing the plot before I know the characters really well. And sometimes it's only by really getting to know those people and spending a lot of time in their heads and listening to all the weird stuff that they're, preoccupied about, that tells me what they would do in a certain situation or how they would act. And it's not always how I would expect it at the beginning. But that's the wonderful thing about writing, is that there's no correct way to do it, or the only right way to do it is the way that works for you. And yeah, Sophie's way is clearly working for her, so I encourage her to go on with it.
Also, people really tend to be, for me, I just couldn't imagine, like I wouldn't try to do it the other way, because I'm like, why would anyone not want to plan? But I notice that the people who are devoted to not planning are equally devoted. They're like, why would I want to do it that way? So I do think that you kind of naturally gravitate towards one or the other. And what I notice in my Dream Author coaching program is, so one of the things I teach in that program is I teach a very, very detailed step-by-step approach to my planning method, which I call the gnocchi draft, the gnocchi method, because just as gnocchi is halfway between potato and pasta, the plan that I end up with is equal parts a plan and a first draft. It's very, I won't go into it in more detail here, but when I teach it in Dream Author, I notice that people either go, oh my goodness, this is what I need to do, I can't wait to get started, I can't wait to try it, this is the key to everything, or they go, but I just don't want to, but I just no, I don't fancy that, take it away. And that to me really shows that there are these kind of instinctive camps, and you're either in one or in the other. And it's only a problem if your way isn't working for you.
Yeah, absolutely. But
I'm just going to go and try and turn my light up, because I've got this orange lamp next to me, and I realise I'm getting oranger as time goes on. So I'm going to just try and sort that out. I'll be back in.
I was just about to say, you have quite the twilight glow about you. Okay,
better.
That is going to be better. There you are. Yes.
Apologies for earlier orangeness, everybody.
Your lighting looks so gentle and warm. I was a little sad about how cool I was looking. Okay, so we do have questions from the comments. So we have several along the lines of, what Agatha Christie book, if you've never read her, would you recommend?
I feel guilty saying this because I feel I should say a Poirot, but I'm going to recommend the one I started with, which was The Body in the Library, which is that was the perfect one to start with for me. And I actually think it is one of Agatha's genuinely flawless, perfect mysteries. There is, in my opinion, you cannot fault that novel on any level.
Yeah. No, I think it, yeah. And am I right in thinking that's the first Marple?
No, first Marple is Murder at the Vicarage.
Oh, of course it is. Yes, yes, yeah. Because I was just thinking about the fact that there is some argument for saying start with, this, I wouldn't say a mystery at Styles, and that's not, what do I mean?
Mysterious Affair at Styles.
Mysterious Affair at Styles. Sorry, thank you. Because it's the first Poirot, and it does kind of, it sets the ground rules for so much of what happens later, and it introduces Poirot in a way that you don't actually see in the later novels. But it's a very good novel, but I don't think it's her finest. And if I was trying to hook people in, I'm not sure if it's the one that I would choose. I'm quite partial to A Murder is Announced, just because it's so brilliant, and it starts with one of those situations that Sophie was talking about, where you have a premise that just seems impossible, and you want to read on because you want to find out why on earth someone would do this and what's going to happen. If I was going to start, it seems a bit mean, but I'd be quite tempted to start with Death on the Nile, in a way, just because it's brilliant and it sums up so much of what Christie does in other books in terms of getting people into a closed location, setting up a seemingly impossible situation, and then resolving it with panache. I would say one of those two, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because like you sort of think you wouldn't want to start someone on one of the very best, because you'd want them to.
Yeah.
So when I'm thinking, what would I start someone on? I would go for something that's really solidly brilliant, but maybe not one of the best. So I think for me, Death on the Nile, because it has so many elements that are so brilliant, I'd maybe want someone to have that as maybe their fifth Christie read. It's really sort of tricky, and I guess it's lucky that most people just read them in some random order without because if you were trying to precision engineer it so that everyone read in the best possible order, it would probably be impossible to work out.
It's like those Star Wars discussions, isn't it? You know, what order should people watch the Star Wars canon in? Like, don't go there. Let other people do that.
I will say, as a bookseller, and as someone that And Then There Were None was my first Christie, I like starting people with that one because there's no character tie. Like, you don't feel like you're at the beginning of a series, at the end of a series. You just kind of read that book, and if you like it, and bonus, most people have heard of it or heard of the movie versions, or there's some recognition to that plot, so they're excited to read it, and then once they've read it, they come back for more. I'd say we normally start people on the first in the series, or Roger Ackroyd, just because it was so groundbreaking. But you're in good hands really with any of those. Sadly, we don't necessarily start anyone on Tommy and Tuppence, although they have their virtues.
I don't think they do. Let's not be polite about this. I am not a Tommy and Tuppence fan.
I do think that By the Pricking of My Thumbs is brilliant. That is the Tommy and Tuppence
That's
novel.
the best one. Yeah, I agree.
There's two elements in that novel which are just as good as anything Christie ever does, and the whole novel isn't one of her best, but those two elements make it a really good, solid contender for me. Crooked House is another good one.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Lots of the standalones, actually. Ordeal by Innocence is another brilliant one. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question for Sophie. What do you think you've borrowed from Christie's style?
It's really tricky because I think what I've borrowed or tried to include in my Poirot novels from her style it's not her prose style. So she writes a very unique, simple, economical kind of a sentence. She always just has you looking at what she's written going, how did she do that in so few words, so simply? And that is definitely not my writing style. So I think in terms of her style, it's much more what I've tried to do is write her style of story rather than her style of language. And in terms of her style of story, I have directly chosen, not only since writing Poirot, but even before, even in my thriller writing, I've always chosen, for example, to try and start with a really outlandish or impossible seeming mystery where the reader can't even begin to speculate what might be going on. And I've always tried to build up the reader's desire to know throughout the book by regularly having the detectives, if they're there, sort of saying, it makes no sense. What could possibly be going on? I mean, that's really a lot of what you need to do, is to get the reader sort of desperate to know, is to show the characters in the story being desperate to know. So, playing fair with the reader, I've always tried to be very unguessable. Like, one of the things I'm proudest about in my literary career is that the compliment I get most often, probably more than anything else, is I never can see it coming in your book. Like, it's always unguessable. And that is something I've deliberately tried to do because it's what I love about Agatha. So it's more her style in terms of the key elements of what a crime story should contain rather than her prose style.
But I think it's a key point to say that you do always play fair with the reader, just like she did. It's always there. It's just nearly impossible to get.
yeah, it's always definitely there. I just don't sort of present it in a way that the reader will go, oh, that's going to be significant.
Yeah. How do you research your locations? Let's start with Ruth this time.
My locations are often fictional, actually. They usually have some element of places that I've been or visited. So The Lying Game is based on a real village in France, which really has like these nets over the windows in the same way. And One by One is no exception. It's a fictional resort in the French Alps, but it has some pretty key similarities to Val d'Isère, and the run that the characters go down at the end, I'm trying not to spoil this, is based on a real kind of semi-off-piste run in Val d'Isère, which is terrifying. And some friends took me down it, and the book is dedicated to them because they got me to the other end in one piece, which was all that was required. So yeah, I don't research them in that sense. There's lots of stuff that I do have to research, like when I sat down and decided that I was going to set a book in the world of .com startups, I very quickly realized I know nothing about the world of .com startups, and I needed to educate myself pretty quickly because otherwise it wasn't going to be convincing. So that was a real process of kind of, real learning curve. But no, in terms of location, I just think of a place that I would like to spend a year, because writing a book takes a long time, and you don't want to spend your writing time somewhere boring. Why do that when you could go somewhere that you'd never get the chance to visit in real life?
How about you, Sophie? Either in the Poirots or in your any of your other books?
Well, I sometimes use locations that I know and love anyway, so then I don't need to do research because the research is all done. So I regularly, before COVID, would go and come to America and do US book tours. And so I've been all over America, and I particularly love Arizona. I don't know why, I just fell in love with Arizona. And one of the things I love about Arizona is they just have the most amazing spa hotels there, with pools and massage places and cocktail bars. So I wrote a standalone novel, which in America is called Keep Her Safe. That is set in an Arizona 5-star spa resort. My latest novel, non-Poirot novel in America, is called Perfect Little Children, and there's a whole section of that takes place in Delray Beach, Florida, because I went there on a book tour and loved it. So I often kind of use settings that I already know and love, but sometimes I have to go and look at a setting. So my second Poirot novel, Closed Casket, is set in Clonakilty in Ireland. So I went there, I looked around. I also went to the house that is the setting for the closed circle murder in Closed Casket. I found a real house that was for sale, and I went round as a viewer of that house. I did not mention that I wanted the tour of the house because I was planning to use it in a book. I pretended I was thinking of buying it, which I wasn't really. But yeah, I will go and look at places. But normally when it comes to setting, I do pretty much what Ruth does. I'm like, where would I love to set a book? And I knew, for example, the Arizona Spa Resort, like I literally adore Arizona Spa Resort. So I knew I'd really enjoy yeah.
So we do have a couple other questions generally about this topic. So Ruth Ware fans, where should you start with Sophie Hannah and vice versa? I will take this. If you haven't read Ruth Ware and you've enjoyed our discussion about Christie's, obviously you certainly can get the new book, but I love Hand Selling Woman in Cabin 10. That's a personal favorite of mine. I just think the premise behind it sets it up. You're in for a treat. Woman hears a a splash in the water in the cabin next to her and is told that no one has occupied that cabin. So you go from there. For Sophie, I mean, you can start with Monogram Murders, which was your first Poirot, or is there a non-Poirot that you would recommend recently?
I might actually, just based on what people tell me, I might start with my latest psychological thriller, Perfect Little Children, because that probably has my favorite hook. It starts with a woman seeing her ex-best friend who she hasn't seen for 12 years, and the friend is with her children. She hears her call them by their names, and yet these children, who were 5 and 3 years old when she last saw them 12 years ago, still appear to be 5 and 3 years old. They haven't aged, they're no taller, they look exactly as they did 12 years ago. And the UK title is Haven't They Grown? For obvious reasons, but in the US it's called Perfect Little Children. So
right,
I would start with that one. That's my son's favorite, and he's a very fussy reader. He won't read any book that isn't by me, weirdly, and that is his favorite of mine.
Well, that's great. So I think we've actually gone past time. I could sit here and talk with the two of you for an unlimited amount of time. It's been really fun for me and a real treat. I hope those of you watching have enjoyed it. As I said at the beginning, we will have copies of Killings at Kingfisher Hill next week. It's out next Tuesday, and we have signed book plates for it, as well as some commemorative Royal Mail Agatha Christie postcards and envelopes. And then for Ruth, we have signed book plates. One by One is out today. We are out of the knit hats because so many of you were on the ball and pre-ordered, but we do have the signed book plates. As soon as all of the fun swag items are here, we will get books shipped out or call you to come pick up. If you enjoy talks, if you enjoy British writers, we will be back on Sunday for a Bring Your Own Tea with Anne Cleves. She'll be talking about her new Vera book, also highly recommended. That's this Sunday. I'd like to thank Danielle and Jessica and all of the people behind the scenes who helped to make this happen this afternoon, and then especially to thank both of you for your time and your energy joining us. It's been a delight. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Really good fun.
All right, so everyone have, the two of you have a wonderful evening. If you're here in Houston with us, have a great day, and we will see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.